Fire is typically the third priority in a wilderness survival situation, and sometimes it's immediate when you're cold and wet. Fire can keep you warm, provide light, cook food, and more. Some conditions and environments are easier to start a fire in than others. Being able to start a fire in heavy rain is an important skill to have because, ironically, it is in those conditions when you would need a fire to stay warm and dry. Lighters or waterproof matches are the most effective devices. But for this video, I'll be using a ferro rod. You'll often see people using ferro rods on survival shows or when practicing bushcraft skills, so knowing how to use one in heavy rain is very useful if you're into that sort of stuff. The first step is to collect kindling. Usually you would collect tinder along with your kindling, or even before it, but we're actually going to wait to do this, and you'll see why in a minute. Good kindling is dry material pencil-sized or thinner, but in these conditions, pretty much everything is wet. In this situation, there are two ways to prepare functional kindling. One way is to collect material so small that it will dry out before or during the fire-making process. The other is to find larger pieces of wood and split them apart to access the dry inner material. Here, I will be doing both. With conifers, it's common to find dead twigs still attached to the bottom of the living tree. This is my favorite kindling in dry conditions, and even in rainy weather, it will still work. But I'm going to harvest even finer kindling to increase the odds of success. Pretty much everyone who's an outdoor hobbyist has been told at some point to never pick up firewood off of wet ground. The logic being that the wood will soak up any long-term moisture stored in the earth, whereas hanging wood can air out. But when everything is already wet, whether that be twigs off of a tree or twigs on the ground, you should be looking for materials that will dry out the fastest. In the boreal forest I'm in, it's these tiny fallen twig ends from the eastern hemlocks. Although they've been sitting on the ground for a while and feel quite wet, these twigs will dry out quickly due to a lack of mass. The smaller the material is, the quicker it will lose water. So one way to dry out these twigs is to store a bundle underneath your clothing. Not only is the wood sheltered from the rain, but it is also utilizing my metabolic heat from moving around to speed up the drying process. And while this kindling is stored away, I can go about collecting larger pieces of wood to begin the second method of harvesting effective kindling. The inner wood of larger pieces is often dried due to the multiple layers of surrounding material shielding it from the elements. This is especially true of conifers with resin that help to preserve the integrity of the wood even when decaying. Conifer resin also acts as a fire accelerant and fire extender, meaning it will take a flame easily and last longer than other wood. This is why I'm using this slab of balsam fir. Split the wood multiple times by driving the top of your knife down the wood using another strong piece. This technique is called batoning. Inside, you should be able to see dry material. Create different sized pieces for your fire layout. You want to gradually increase in wood size as the fire grows. With your kindling ready, it's time to prepare your tinder. Just like before, you want to find a dead coniferous softwood, such as a fir or a pine tree. Any kind of dry wood will work, but these species are best. The idea is that we're going to create tinder from the dry inner wood of the tree. Find a sapling around the thickness of a baseball bat. This will give you enough material to work with. Now what we're going to do is create a feather stick. A feather stick is a piece of wood with a conglomerate of fine wood shavings on one end. After splitting open a section about 1 to 2 feet long, run your blade down the surface of an edge and stop a few inches short of the end to create a long and thin shaving of wood. Do this as many times as possible, constantly finding a new edge to create the next shaving. The goal is to make these shavings as fine as you can. These shavings cover a wide surface area with fine material, maximizing the flammability of that piece of wood. You can create feather sticks with very fine and long curls, and these are more sensitive to combustion, but they also take more time and require a piece of wood with lots of straight grain. Here I ended up making 4 feather sticks to increase my odds of success since the conditions were so poor. With the feather stick or sticks complete, create a platform off the ground using medium-sized sticks. Even moist wood will be better than the rain-soaked ground. This is where we'll be creating the fire. Do this under the cover of a large tree to reduce the amount of rainfall on your materials. The next step is to take your ferro rod and create a small pile of ferrocerium dust. When shaving off material, use a medium pressure and a slow speed. You don't want to accidentally ignite the dust you've built up. You'll only need a pile the size of a pea. Now place the ferro dust in the center of the platform and place the feather stick or sticks over it. Leave a small opening where you will be able to drop sparks onto the ferro dust. You want to keep the striker still and pull the ferro rod back towards you so you don't whack your tinder pile. The ferrocerium combusts at a high enough temperature to ignite even subpar tinder, which is why taking the time to form a dust pile is a great trick to know in trying conditions. You can see the top feather stick is what caught first, so I had to rearrange the structure of my fire setup to catch that flame. Now with the initial fire formed, add your smallest kindling in a teepee formation. Heat rises, so a teepee formation maximizes the amount of wood material touching that flame. Once the smaller kindling ignites, you can begin to add larger pieces of kindling, gradually increasing your material size. The stronger the fire, the thicker the wood you can use. Once you have a coal base, keeping the fire alive gets a lot easier because of that strong and stable source of heat. So if you see your fire struggling, it helps to blow into that coal base. Your breath will push oxygen into the fire, an important element that facilitates growth. At this point, it's all about adding the next size material up and blowing into the fire to increase the heat. Once your teepee structure is taking fuel-sized wood, surround it with a square tower of firewood to create a log cabin structure. This structure will burn longer than a teepee, and the pieces on top shelter the pieces below from rain, although at this point your fire is probably hot enough where this doesn't matter. Once the fire reaches a decent size, it'll be stable enough for you to wander off for short periods of time to collect more firewood. Keep these pieces under the shelter of a large tree or near the fire if the rain lightens up to dry them better. If you're using a lighter or matches instead of a ferro rod, the fire structure is the same, but you would instead hold the flame underneath your feather sticks until you see the wood catch. With a fire, you will be able to get warm, dry your clothes, and keep the bugs away, which is why understanding proper fire starting techniques is a life-saving skill to have.